He always followed the rules of high society until a bet among friends led him to make the most unexpected decision of his life. To deceive his own world, he needs an unlikely wife. But what started as a game could change everything in ways no one ever expected. Welcome to the channel. Before you begin, like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this one. The sun rose lazily over the green hills of Springwater, a fictional town in rural Virginia, known for its hot springs and the coffee, aristocracy that still maintained its prestige through generations. At Primrose Farm, the most prosperous property in the region, the day began early for Emily Mitchell, the youngest daughter of the Mitchells, one of the most traditional families in the area. You need to try on this dress for the charity ball." Victoria, her older sister, entered the room holding a beautiful turquoise blue dress. Emily, at 25, with brown hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders and honey-colored eyes, was known for her kindness and natural charisma. Everyone loved her company, from the farm workers to members of Virginia's high society. "It's beautiful, Vicky, but don't you think it would look better on you?" replied Emily, always modest. Victoria forced a smile. At 28, with harder features and a calculating look, she had always lived in the shadow of her younger sister. While Emily won everyone over with her authenticity, Victoria struggled to keep up appearances and the family's status. "Don't be silly, little sister. You've always been the highlight of the family," said Victoria, the sweet words contrasting with the bitter gleam in her eyes. It was no secret to the farm workers that Victoria harbored a dark feeling toward her sister. Since they were little, when guests arrived and were charmed by Emily's sweetness, Victoria had already shown discomfort. Time only intensified this silent rivalry. In the main hall, Thomas and Eleanor Mitchell, their parents, were talking quietly about the family's financial situation. Primrose Farm, although imposing, faced serious problems after years of careless management by Thomas, who always preferred social life to business responsibilities. "We have no choice, Eleanor. Creditors are closing in on all sides," Thomas muttered, running his hands through his graying hair. "If we don't make a decision now, we'll lose everything." Eleanor sighed, her face heavy with worry. "But negotiate with Maxwell Pierce. That man has a terrible reputation in the valley. They say he got his fortune through questionable methods. He now owns half of the Spring Valley and has become a political force. Besides, his only son, Brandon, needs a wife. An alliance with the Pierces could save our family from ruin." What the couple didn't notice was Victoria's presence, listening to the conversation hidden behind the half-open door, her eyes shining with an idea that was beginning to form. That night during dinner, Victoria was exceptionally attentive to Emily, serving her favorite dish and asking about her plans for the future. The whole family noticed the sudden change in behavior. "What's gotten into you today, daughter?" asked Eleanor, surprised by the uncommon gentleness of her firstborn. "Can't I simply be attentive to my dear sister?" replied Victoria, pouring more wine for Emily. "After all, we're family." After dinner, while the parents were discussing in their office, Victoria invited Emily to have tea in the garden. "This chamomile tea with lemon balm is perfect for relaxing," commented Victoria, watching carefully as her sister drank. Emily didn't take long to feel the effects. Her vision became blurry, her eyelids heavy. I'm not feeling well," she murmured, before collapsing in the chair. When Emily woke up, she was inside a moving carriage. Her head was throbbing, her mouth dry. Confused, she tried to get up, but was prevented by a strong dizziness. "Finally awake, Miss Mitchell." A man in uniform was watching her from the seat across. "We're almost arriving at Pierce Manor." Pierce Manor? But I don't understand. What am I doing here?" Emily tried to organize her thoughts, panic growing in her chest. "You have been promised in marriage to Mr. Maxwell Pierce's son. The documents have already been signed by your father. I am charged with ensuring your safe arrival." The revelation fell like lightning upon Emily. Marriage? To a stranger? Her heart raced as she tried to process the information. "This is some kind of mistake. My father would never do this to me without consulting me." But the words died on her lips as she remembered the family's financial situation, the whispers between her parents, Victoria's exaggerated kindness. The carriage continued along winding roads, moving further and further away from Springwater. From the glimpses she could get of the landscape, Emily realized they were heading to the north of Virginia, a region known for its imposing mountains and isolated properties. "Please, take me back. This is kidnapping," she pleaded, trying to reach the carriage door. "I'm sorry, miss, but I have express orders. Besides, your father received a considerable advance for the agreement. Going back would mean the ruin of your family." Tears began to stream down Emily's face. How could her own parents do this? Sell their own daughter like merchandise? The feeling of betrayal was suffocating. After hours of travel, the carriage finally stopped in front of an imposing neoclassical mansion, surrounded by meticulously tended gardens and uniformed guards. "Welcome to Pierce Manor, miss. Your future awaits." Emily was led into the mansion by two silent maids. The interior was stunning, with imported marble, valuable paintings, and European furniture. But to her, it seemed more like a golden prison. She was taken to a luxurious room where clothes were already prepared. The maids helped her bathe and dress, ignoring her questions and pleas. "Mr. Brandon Pierce awaits you for dinner in an hour," informed one of the maids before leaving Emily alone with her desperate thoughts. Downstairs, Brandon Pierce paced impatiently around the office. Tall, athletic, with black hair and penetrating eyes, he was considered one of the most coveted bachelors in the region. But his serious expression and rigid posture betrayed a man accustomed to commanding, not courting. "Has she arrived?" he asked the butler who entered the room. "Yes, sir, she's preparing for dinner." Brandon nodded, thoughtful. "And how did she react to the arrangement?" "As expected, sir. Confusion, then indignation." An enigmatic smile appeared on Brandon's lips. "Interesting. I expected a submissive bride, as they promised me. It seems the Mitchells weren't completely honest." Meanwhile, in the room, Emily desperately searched for a way out. The windows were too high, the doors locked from the outside. There was no way to escape. For the first time, the reality of her situation hit her with full force. In Springwater, Victoria smiled as she rearranged the room that once belonged to her sister. Finally, she would be the only daughter, the center of attention of the family and local society. "Miss Victoria," called one of the maids, "your parents are asking why Miss Emily didn't come down for breakfast." "My sister decided to spend some time at our aunt's farm in Oak Ridge," Victoria replied naturally. "It was all very sudden. She asked me to explain to everyone. You know how Emily is, always impulsive." The maid frowned, suspicious. Emily had never been impulsive. It was Victoria who had that temperament, but she didn't dare question it. At Pierce Manor, the clock struck 8 when Emily came down for dinner, escorted by a maid. In the immense dining room, only one figure was waiting, standing near the fireplace. "Miss Mitchell, I presume," said Brandon, turning to face her. His eyes traveled over Emily's pale face and red eyes. "Welcome to your new home." Emily raised her chin, determined not to show weakness. "This is not a home, Mr. Pierce. It's a prison, and I did not agree to be your prisoner." Brandon raised an eyebrow, surprised by the direct response. "Interesting. I was told you were docile and obedient." "Whoever told you that clearly doesn't know me," replied Emily, maintaining her composure despite the fear she felt. "Your father and your sister, especially your sister, who was quite detailed in her description of your character." The mention of Victoria made Emily's blood run cold. Her own sister had actively participated in that plan. The betrayal now seemed even deeper. "My sister," Emily's voice faltered. "Victoria participated in this?" Brandon indicated the chair for her to sit. The servants began to serve dinner, while he maintained a neutral expression. "Your sister was the one who first suggested the arrangement. To your father, when she learned of our interest in an alliance with the Mitchells, she described you as the perfect choice, educated, kind, submissive." Brandon watched her carefully. "I'm beginning to suspect that her intentions were not so fraternal." Emily felt her stomach turn. Since she was little, she had noticed Victoria's envious look, but she never imagined that her sister could go to such an extreme. The pieces were beginning to fit together, the exaggerated kindness in recent days, the tea with a strange taste, Victoria's sighs of relief when she thought no one was looking. "Victoria always wanted to get rid of me," murmured Emily, more to herself than to Brandon. "But I didn't think she was capable of selling me." "The Mitchells didn't sell you for little," commented Brandon, cutting a piece of meat. "Your father received enough to save Primrose Farm from bankruptcy, at least for now." Emily raised her eyes, indignant. "And you? What do you gain from this? A wife who doesn't love you, who was brought to your house by force?" Brandon smiled sideways, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What do I gain? Legitimacy. The Pierces have money and power, but they don't have the name or history of the Mitchells. My father built an empire from nothing, but we're still seen as new money outsiders. A marriage with a Mitchell opens doors that money alone can't open." He took a sip of wine before continuing. "As for love, well, that's a luxury that people like us can rarely afford to have." "People like us?" "Pieces in a larger board, Miss Mitchell. Our parents, society, business, all have expectations. We fulfill our roles." "I refuse to be a piece," replied Emily, pushing away her plate, still untouched. "I will not marry you." "You're already married," said Brandon with a disconcerting calm. "The civil ceremony was performed by proxy. Your father signed the papers. All that remains is the religious ceremony, scheduled for a month from now." The shock left Emily speechless. She was, legally, the wife of this man she barely knew. Without realizing it, tears began to run down her face. "I may not be the husband you dreamed of," continued Brandon, his voice softening a bit, "but I promise to treat you with respect. I'm not a monster, despite what you may have heard about my family." "Respect? I was drugged, kidnapped, and forced into a marriage. Is that your definition of respect?" Emily stood up, trembling with anger. Brandon also stood up, his intimidating height. "It wasn't I who drugged you or planned your transportation in this manner. Your father agreed to the marriage, but the methods were your sister's idea. She insisted that you wouldn't agree to come willingly. And you accepted that?" Emily faced him, defiant. "I accepted that I was being offered a bride. The details..." He made a vague gesture. "I didn't ask. Perhaps I should have asked." Emily turned and walked toward the door. "Where are my quarters? I prefer to retire." Brandon signaled to a maid who was waiting discreetly in a corner of the hall. "Irene will accompany you. Rest well, Miss Mitchell. Tomorrow you will know the manor and its surroundings." "Am I a prisoner then? I can't leave," she asked without turning to face him. "You can walk through the gardens and the property accompanied, but trying to escape would be imprudent. We are miles from the nearest town in the middle of the mountains, and besides," his voice took on a more serious tone, "without our financial protection, your family will lose everything in a matter of weeks." That night, in her luxurious but strange room, Emily cried until she fell asleep. Not for the forced marriage, not for the lost wealth, but for the betrayal of her own sister. How could Victoria have destroyed her life out of pure envy? The next day, Irene, the personal maid assigned to Emily, woke her early. She was a middle-aged woman with a gentle but reserved expression. "Mr. Brandon asked me to show you the gardens this morning, madam," she informed, helping Emily dress. "Don't call me madam," asked Emily. "I still don't feel married." Irene nodded, understanding. "As you wish, Miss Emily. Breakfast is served on the terrace." The gardens of Pierce Manor were truly impressive. Designed by European landscape designers, they combined tropical exuberance with classical organization. Rose bushes, cherry trees, oaks in bloom, and a multitude of native and imported species created a paradise-like setting. "It's beautiful," admitted Emily, despite herself. "Mr. Brandon personally supervises the gardens," commented Irene. "It's his passion." Emily stopped, surprised. "Him? He doesn't seem the type of man who cares about flowers." "You're mistaken, miss. The master knows the name of each plant, knows their needs. Sometimes I see him here alone, before dawn, personally taking care of some of the more delicate species." There was an almost maternal tone in Irene's voice. As they walked, Emily noticed unusual movement at the limits of the property. Armed men patrolled and some carried boxes to distant warehouses. "What is that?" she asked. Irene became tense. "It's better not to ask, miss. There are things in the manor that, well, the less you know, the safer you'll be." Emily felt a chill. What exactly was Maxwell Pierce? What did his son Brandon really do besides managing the family properties? Later, while resting in a pergola covered with flowering vines, Emily was surprised by Brandon's arrival, who was carrying a book in his hands. "I hope I'm not disturbing," he said, maintaining a respectful distance. "This is your domain. I'm the one who's disturbing," she replied, still bitter. Brandon sighed, sitting on a nearby bench. "Can we talk civilly? We'll be together for a long time. It would be more pleasant if we weren't enemies." "What are we then? Forced accomplices? Victims of circumstances, perhaps." He opened the book he was carrying. "I brought something I thought you might like. Irene mentioned that you appreciate poetry." It was a collection of poems by Emily Dickinson. The gesture surprised her. How did he know? "Your sister mentioned your taste for literature when we met to discuss the terms of the agreement," he explained, noticing her confusion. It was one of the few useful pieces of information she shared. "Victoria knows nothing about me," murmured Emily. "She observed me, but never really knew me." Brandon extended the book to her. "Perhaps we can start over. Not as husband and wife, not yet, but as two people trying to find a path amid choices made by others." Emily hesitated, but ended up accepting the book. It was a small but significant gesture. A book didn't erase what had happened, but it offered a pause in hostility. "Why you?" she suddenly asked. "Why does the heir of the Pierces need to marry a bankrupt Mitchell? It doesn't make sense." Brandon was silent for a moment, as if pondering how much he could reveal. "My father has powerful enemies. The Mitchell family, despite recent financial problems, still has important political connections in Virginia and D.C. A marriage with you isn't just about social status, it's about alliances. So I'm a political shield? Just as I am a financial shield for your family." He faced her. "As I said yesterday, we are pieces in a larger game." In the following days, a routine began to establish itself. Emily spent the mornings exploring the manor, always accompanied by Irene. She learned that the property, besides the main mansion, included productive farms, housing for employees, and a small chapel. In the afternoon, she usually read or embroidered on the terrace. Brandon met her for dinner, maintaining polite but distant conversations. On one of these nights, while they were dining, they were interrupted by a breathless messenger who handed an envelope to Brandon. "Excuse me," he said, opening the document with a grave expression. His face paled as he read the contents. "Any problem?" asked Emily, noticing the change in his posture. "We need to accelerate the religious ceremony," he replied, calling the butler. "Prepare everything for this weekend, no later." "But we're 3 weeks away from the scheduled date," protested Emily. "What happened?" Brandon faced her, and for the first time she saw a trace of vulnerability in his eyes. "The empire my father built is being threatened. We need this alliance formalized immediately." "Why? What's the difference? We're already legally married." "The difference," he explained, carefully folding the document, "is that a religious wedding with the daughter of a traditional Virginia family will be reported. Everyone will know. And that's exactly what we need now. Visibility." Emily felt there was something more behind that sudden rush, something that Brandon wasn't revealing. "And if I refuse?" "Please don't do that." For the first time, his tone was pleading, not commanding. "There's more at stake than you imagine. Your family is still in Springwater, vulnerable." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed. "Are you threatening me? Using my family as hostages?" "I'm being realistic. My enemies wouldn't hesitate to use any weakness against me. A reluctant bride would be seen as a crack in the facade." That night, alone in her room, Emily pondered her options. She could try to escape, but where to? Without money, without knowing the region, she would be captured within hours. She could continue resisting, but that would put her family at risk. She reflected, she noticed something strange. The door of her wardrobe, which she always kept closed, was ajar. Approaching cautiously, she realized that someone had gone through her clothes. At the bottom of the wardrobe, hidden among dresses, she found a small box with a letter. The paper had the Mitchell family crest. Her heart accelerated as she recognized her father's handwriting. "My dear daughter, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked. The messenger managed to deliver this package to one of the trusted maids at the manor. First, I need to beg your forgiveness. What I did, is unforgivable. Allowing them to take you in that manner. I can only say that I was desperate and blind. It was your sister who suggested the arrangement, promising that you would understand the sacrifice necessary for the family. But now I know that I was deceived, not only by Victoria but also by the Pierces. Maxwell Pierce is not just a successful businessman, as he wants everyone to believe. He controls a network of questionable activities throughout the state. His son Brandon, despite being more reserved, is involved up to his neck in his father's business. However, not everything is as it seems. I recently discovered that Brandon has been trying to distance the family from these operations. He has a plan, and you, dear daughter, whether by accident or design, have become central to it. Inside this box is a locket that belonged to your grandmother. It's not just a jewel, it's a key. Keep it safe and use it when necessary. I am working to bring you back home, but I need time. Meanwhile, be careful, observe, learn, and remember, not everyone at Pierce Manor is your enemy. With desperate love and eternal remorse, your father." Emily opened the small box with trembling hands. Inside was a gold locket with the Mitchell family crest engraved. But what did her father mean by "it's a key"? And what plan did Brandon have that involved her? The door of the room suddenly opened, making Emily hide the letter and the locket in a quick movement. It was Irene bringing tea. "The miss looks pale," commented the maid, placing the tray on the table. "Are you feeling well?" "Just tired," replied Emily, observing the maid with new eyes. Was Irene the trusted person mentioned by her father? "Irene, how long have you worked for the Pierces?" "All my life, miss. My mother served Mr. Maxwell's family and I grew up here." "And you? Trust them? The Pierces?" Irene stopped what she was doing and looked at Emily with intensity. "I trust Mr. Brandon with my life. As for his father," she shook her head slightly. "The walls have ears in the manor, miss. It's better not to ask certain questions." After Irene left, Emily held the locket tightly, feeling its weight and significance. Something was happening beyond the apparent matrimonial arrangement. She was at the center of a complex web, without fully understanding the threads that held her. And in the middle of that web, Brandon Pierce remained an enigma. Villain or victim? Captor or ally? As the day of the religious wedding approached, Emily realized she needed to decide. Would she continue resisting, or would she start playing the game on her own terms? The day of the religious wedding dawned with a fine, persistent rain. From the window of her room, Emily watched the drops run down the glass, feeling that the sky was crying for her. 3 maidens hired especially for the occasion helped her with the preparations, dressing her in a luxurious French lace dress and placing a delicate veil over her carefully arranged hair. The locket her father had sent was hidden in an internal pocket sewn into the dress, her only connection to her previous life, a silent reminder that not everything was as it seemed at Pierce Manor. "The miss looks beautiful," commented one of the girls, adjusting the train of the dress. Emily just smiled weakly. Under other circumstances, this would be a day of celebration. Now it seemed more like a staging, a play where she played the main role without knowing the complete script. Soft knocks on the door announced Irene's arrival, who entered holding a small velvet box. "Can the girls give us a moment?" asked Emily. When they were alone, Irene approached and spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Brandon asked me to give you this. He said it's a tradition of the Pierce family for the bride to wear on the wedding day." The box contained a set of sapphires and diamonds, earrings, necklace, and a delicate tiara. Along with it was a handwritten note. Not out of obligation, but by choice. Wear only if you desire. B. Emily was surprised by the gesture. It was the first time Brandon had offered her a real choice since her arrival at the manor. "He seems nervous today," commented Irene, helping Emily put on the jewels. "I've never seen him like this before." Nervous? Brandon Pierce? Emily couldn't imagine that controlled man showing any vulnerability. "Mr. Brandon is more than he appears, miss. There's much you don't know about him." Before Emily could ask more, the other young women returned and Irene discreetly stepped away. The conversation left Emily intrigued. What more would there be behind Brandon Pierce's cold facade? The ceremony would be held in the chapel of the manor, built in the 18th century with stones brought from England. Despite the rain, important guests were beginning to arrive. Politicians, farmers, businessmen, all curious to witness the union of the mysterious heir of the Pierces with the youngest daughter of the traditional Mitchells. When the time came, Emily was led to the entrance of the chapel. To her surprise, Maxwell Pierce was waiting to accompany her down the aisle. "Your family couldn't come," he said, offering his arm. It was the first time Emily had met him personally. Tall, with graying hair and calculating eyes, Maxwell Pierce exuded power and intimidation. Unfortunate situation, but inevitable in the circumstances. "What circumstances?" asked Emily, reluctant to accept his arm. Maxwell smiled coldly. "The roads are dangerous lately. Fever outbreaks, robberies. The valley is not as safe as it used to be." Emily understood the implicit message. Her family was being deliberately kept away. Another piece of the game that she still didn't fully understand. The music began to play, and the doors of the chapel opened. Before the altar, Brandon was waiting, imposing in his dark suit. His eyes met Emily's, and for an instant she saw something different in them. Not coldness, not calculation, but something close to regret. Throughout the entire ceremony, Emily felt strangely disconnected, as if observing everything from the outside. The priest's words, the exchanged vows, the ring sliding onto her finger. Everything seemed part of a strange and distant dream. When they were finally declared husband and wife, Brandon leaned in for the traditional kiss. His lips touched Emily's with surprising gentleness, and he quickly whispered, "Trust me, just for today." The reception took place in the immense main hall of the manor. Dozens of important guests circulated, drinking French champagne and commenting on the union of the two families. Emily was introduced to countless people, all curious to meet the new Mrs. Pierce. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," said a middle-aged man, kissing her hand with excessive formality. "Edward Vasconcelles, State Secretary of Security. Your husband and I have many businesses in common." Something in the man's tone made Emily shudder. Brandon, who was at her side, visibly tensed. "My wife is tired of introductions, Secretary," said Brandon, placing his hand protectively on Emily's back. "If you'll excuse us." He led her to a quieter corner of the hall. "Stay away from Vasconcelles," he murmured. "He is not trustworthy." "Who is trustworthy here?" replied Emily, with bitterness. "So far, I've only met liars and manipulators." Brandon observed her for a moment, as if pondering something important. "Come with me, there's something I need to show you." He led her through a discreet corridor to a door that Emily had never noticed before, hidden behind a tapestry. The door led to a spiral staircase that descended to what appeared to be a basement. "What is this place?" asked Emily, hesitant. "The truth," replied Brandon simply, lighting lamps as they descended. The basement revealed itself to be a kind of secret office, with shelves full of books, maps on the walls, and a large metal safe. Brandon carefully closed the door behind them. "This is the only place in the manor where we can speak freely," he explained. "Not even my father knows about this room." "Why are you showing me this? Why now?" "Because from today on, you are not just my facade wife, but my most visible ally. I need you to understand what you're involved in." Brandon ran his hand through his hair in a rare display of nervousness. "My father built an empire based on businesses that go far beyond coffee and mining, smuggling, extortion, bribery of authorities. And you," Emily faced him. "Are you also involved?" "I was. I grew up believing that was how the world worked. But in recent years," he hesitated, "I've been working to change the course of the family business," legitimize them. That's why Vasconcel and others like him observe me with so much attention. They sense that I'm moving away from my father's circle. Emily studied him, trying to distinguish truth from manipulation. Why tell me this now? Because I need your help. Brandon approached, his gaze intense. Your father didn't sell you just for money. I made a deal with him. In exchange for the marriage, I promised to protect Primrose Farm and help him expose Vasconcel and other corrupt officials who have been draining the valley for decades. My father knew this, he agreed. At first, no, he came to me desperate for money without knowing who I really was. But when I explained my plans, he saw an opportunity. It was only after that your sister interfered, insisting on the unusual arrangement of your coming here. Emily felt her head spin with the revelations. And the letter my father sent me? The locket. Brandon's eyes shone with surprise. So he managed to make contact. You knew about the letter. I suspected he would try. The locket, did you bring it? Hesitantly, Emily took the small object from the hidden pocket in the dress. Brandon examined it carefully. As I suspected, it's not just a jewel, he said, turning it to show a specific pattern engraved on the back. It's a key to a safe in Oak Ridge, where your father has kept incriminating documents about Vasconcel and my father. Documents that can end the corruption scheme that has controlled this region for generations. And what do you intend to do with these documents? Clear the Pierce name, rebuild our fortune in a legitimate way, and in the process, free the Knee Valley from the clutches of men like Vasconcel. Brandon returned the locket. But I can't do it alone. My father suspects me, and his allies constantly observe me. And me. What's my role in this plan? You are my alibi, my cover, the perfect wife of the obedient son of Maxwell Pierce. While everyone thinks I'm following the family tradition, marrying a girl from a good family to consolidate our empire, I can work behind the scenes. Emily felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. So that's it. I was brought here to be your facade, a human shield. That wasn't the original plan, admitted Brandon. But your sister complicated everything. When she suggested to your father that you would be the perfect bride, he saw an opportunity to strengthen our alliance. And I couldn't refuse. And if I refuse to participate in this, now and if I escape, tell everyone about your plans? Brandon faced her, his face unexpectedly soft. I won't stop you. But think about what will happen to your family if you leave. Think about the valley, the families that suffer under the yoke of men like my father and Vasconcel. This isn't just my plan, Emily. Your father is also involved. He believes it's worth fighting for. A long silence established itself between them. Emily felt divided. Part of her simply wanted to flee, leave behind that web of intrigues and betrayals. But another part, the part that always cared about others, that believed in justice, recognized the importance of what Brandon was trying to do. And my sister, she finally asked, what's her role in all this? Victoria has her own ambitions. She saw in the arrangement a way to get rid of you and increase her influence in Springwater. What she doesn't know is that Vasconcel has plans for Primrose Farm that go far beyond a simple arranged marriage. What plans? Your family's farm sits on one of the largest mineral water reserves in the state. Vasconcel and his associates want that water no matter the cost. Your father discovered this and tried to resist. That's when the financial problems began. The door of the secret basement suddenly opened, making both of them start. It was Irene, pale and breathless. Mr. Brandon, your father is looking for you both. Secretary Vasconcel is asking questions. He suggested that perhaps you were betraying his trust. Brandon exchanged a significant look with Emily. Let's go back to the party. Remember, from now on, we are the loving couple that everyone expects to see. As they climbed the stairs, Emily held Brandon's arm, forcing him to face her. If we're going to do this together, I need your word that you're being honest with me now. No more half-truths. Brandon hesitated only an instant before nodding. You have my word. Partners from now on. When they returned to the hall, all eyes turned to the couple. Maxwell Pierce and Secretary Vasconcelles were talking in a corner, watching them carefully. "There are the lovebirds," said Maxwell, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were starting to worry. It's not polite to abandon your guests, son." "Forgive me, father. I was just showing my wife some family mementos." Brandon put his arm around Emily's waist, pulling her closer. Vasconcelles raised his glass in a toast. "To the young couple, may your union be prosperous." There was something threatening in his tone. Emily, understanding her role in the staging, smiled and leaned in to kiss Brandon's cheek. "My husband is so attentive," she said with a studied sweetness. "I'm impressed by his dedication to family." Something in Vasconcelles' eyes shone, suspicion, perhaps, or calculation. But the moment passed, and soon the guests returned to their conversations, the brief disappearance of the newlyweds forgotten amid the celebrations. Later, when the last guest finally departed, Emily and Brandon were conducted to their quarters, now a shared room as expected of newlyweds. The door closed behind them, leaving them alone for the first time as husband and wife. "And now?" asked Emily, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. Brandon took a pillow and a blanket from the wardrobe. "Now we'll sleep. You in the bed, me on the sofa. Our marriage may be an alliance, but it doesn't mean it needs to be more than that." He paused, looking at her seriously. "I'm not the monster you thought I was, Emily, and I hope, with time, to prove that." That night, lying in bed while listening to Brandon's steady breathing coming from the sofa on the other side of the room, Emily reflected on the turnaround in her life. From victim to ally, from prisoner to partner in a dangerous plan. And somewhere in Springwater, Victoria Mitchell celebrated her apparent victory without imagining that the game was just beginning. The weeks following the wedding were an exercise in balance for Emily. During the day, she played the role of the devoted wife, learning the habits and customs of the manor, charming the staff with her kindness, and gradually winning the trust of Maxwell Pierce. At night, in the secret basement, she and Brandon planned their next steps. "We need to recover those documents in Oak Ridge," said Brandon, studying a map of the region. "But I can't simply disappear for days. It would raise suspicions." I could go," suggested Emily. "As your wife, it would be natural to make a pilgrimage to the historic churches, buy a trousseau, visit jewelry stores." Brandon shook his head. "My father would never allow you to travel alone. He knows you're still a risk. Then come with me. A belated honeymoon. No one would suspect a loving couple visiting the most romantic town in Virginia." The idea had merit, and after some discussion they agreed on the plan. Maxwell Pierce, surprisingly, approved the trip, seeing it as an opportunity to introduce the new daughter-in-law to Virginia society. The day before their departure, while supervising the packing of the suitcases, Emily received an unexpected visit. Mrs. Constance, the housekeeper who had managed the manor for decades, entered her room silently. "Excuse me, ma'am." The grey-haired woman with rigid posture rarely addressed Emily directly, preferring to communicate through Irene. "I brought something I thought you might want to see before your trip." She extended a yellowed envelope. Inside, Emily found a newspaper clipping from Springwater, dated the previous week. The headline read, "Victoria Mitchell assumes presidency of Charitable Association after mysterious disappearance of sister." The article described how Victoria had bravely assumed the family's social responsibilities after Emily had run away to marry in secret, abandoning her community duties. There was a photograph of Victoria, radiant, surrounded by local society ladies, including Secretary Vasconcelles' wife. "How did you get this?" asked Emily, feeling hatred for her sister reignite. "I have my contacts," replied Mrs. Constance enigmatically. "I thought you should know how your sister is creating a convenient version of the facts. Why are you showing me this? I thought you were loyal to Mr. Maxwell." The old housekeeper sighed. "I've served this house for 40 years, child. I've seen Maxwell Pierce build his empire, seen Brandon grow up. I know things that would make your blood freeze." She paused. "But I also know how to recognize when something needs to change. Brandon is trying to fix his father's mistakes, and you..." Her wrinkled eyes studied Emily attentively. "You might be exactly what he needs to succeed." After Mrs. Constance's departure, Emily was thoughtful. The circle of allies was larger than she imagined, but so were the risks. Victoria's connection to Vasconcel's wife was no coincidence. The next morning, Emily and Brandon departed for Oak Ridge in a luxurious carriage, escorted by 2 personal guards, a precaution that Maxwell Pierce had insisted was necessary. Only when they were sufficiently distant from the manor did Brandon visibly relax. "The men are trustworthy," he explained. "They work for me, not for my father." The journey to the historic town took 2 days. To any observer, they really seemed like a couple on their honeymoon, dining by candlelight at inns, walking arm in arm, exchanging complicit smiles. Only they knew that those moments of apparent intimacy were when they discussed strategies, in whispers. Oak Ridge welcomed them with its Baroque splendor. They stayed at a luxurious inn in the historic center, from where they could easily access the Imperial Bank, where the safe mentioned by Emily's father would be. "We need to be careful," Brandon warned as they walked along the cobblestone streets. "Vasconcel has informants everywhere, especially in financial institutions." At the bank, they were received with the deference reserved for great fortunes. The manager personally conducted them to the private safe area, explaining the security procedures. "The safe was rented years ago by Mr. Thomas Mitchell," explained the manager. "According to his instructions, only someone carrying the specific key can access it." Emily presented the locket, which fit perfectly into the special lock. The safe contained only a worn leather folder. Brandon could barely contain his anxiety. As they waited to return to the privacy of their room at the inn, to examine the contents, "Are these the documents that can bring down my father and Vasconcel?" asked Emily when they were finally alone. Brandon opened the folder carefully. Inside were detailed records of illegal transactions, maps of properties acquired through dubious means, and most surprisingly, a list of politicians and businessmen involved in the scheme, with specific values and favors. "This is more than we expected," murmured Brandon, flipping through the papers. "Your father was meticulous. There's enough evidence here to send half of Virginia's elite to prison, including your father." "Including my father," agreed Brandon with a grave expression. "And now, do we deliver this to the authorities?" Brandon laughed without humor. "Which authorities? The state police chief is on this list, the district judge too. We need someone above suspicion, someone with enough power to act without being blocked by the system." "And who would that person be?" "Governor Montgomery. He's new in office, elected with promises to combat corruption. He's in Richmond now, but he'll come to Oak Ridge next week for the Independence Day celebrations." Emily pondered the information. "A week is a long time. What will we do with these documents until then?" "We can't keep them with us. It's too risky." Brandon thought for a moment. "I know someone in this town I can trust. A former professor from the School of Mines who helped me when I began to question my father's business." That night, under the cover of darkness, they visited the modest house of Professor Anthony Sampson on the outskirts of town. The elderly man, with a white beard and perceptive eyes, received them with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "I knew this day would come," he said, after Brandon explained the situation. "Your father has always been a dangerous man, my boy, and you've always had too much strength to be just his puppet." The professor agreed to guard the documents until the right moment. "I have a hiding place that not even the rats would discover," he guaranteed with an enigmatic smile. In the following days, Emily and Brandon maintained their facade of a honeymoon couple, visiting churches, museums, and jewelry stores. To Emily's surprise, some of these moments began to seem less forced. There was something about Brandon, his intelligence, his determination, his moral complexity, that awakened in her more than just reluctant respect. On an afternoon of exceptionally blue sky, as they walked through Independence Square, Brandon surprised her with a confession. "You know, when my father said I would marry a Mitchell, I imagined a fragile and submissive girl. I was prepared to protect her but keep my distance. I never thought I would find a partner." Emily felt her face warm. "And I expected to find an insensitive tyrant. It seems we both surprised each other." Something was changing between them, a subtle approach that neither dared to name. At night, Brandon still slept on the sofa, maintaining the respectful distance he had promised. But their looks, their conversations, the way their fingers occasionally touched when passing documents to each other, everything indicated a growing connection. On the fourth night in Oak Ridge, they were awakened in the early hours by urgent knocks on their door. It was Professor Anthony, pale and breathless. "I need to speak with you," he whispered, entering quickly. "I received an unexpected visit today. Men asking questions about new guests in town, especially young couples. They described you with disturbing precision." "Vasconcel," concluded Brandon, exchanging a worried look with Emily. "He must have informants at the bank, or perhaps at the inn." "Are the documents safe?" asked Emily. "For now," replied the professor. "But you are not. You need to leave Oak Ridge immediately. I have a friend with a property in Marion. He can hide you until the governor's arrival." As they hurriedly prepared to leave, Emily realized something disturbing. If Vasconcel knows we're here, he can deduce the reason. What if he decides to go after my family in Springwater? Brandon stopped packing. "You're right, he could use them as leverage against us." He turned to the professor. "We need to send a warning. Someone trustworthy who can alert Mr. Thomas Mitchell." "I can send my nephew," offered Anthony. "He has a good horse and knows shortcuts that would shorten the journey by half." The letter was quickly written, in code that only Thomas would recognize. The professor's nephew departed immediately, while Emily and Brandon prepared to head in the opposite direction to Marion. The night escape was tense. They abandoned the official Pierce carriage, considered too easy to track, and departed in a simple cart disguised as a merchant couple. The two trusted guards went in different directions to confuse potential pursuers. On the road to Marion, Emily couldn't stop thinking about her family. Despite Victoria's betrayal, her parents were still in danger because of her. "Vasconcel wouldn't hesitate to use them against us," she said to Brandon as the cart jolted along the dirt road. "My mother, my father." "And you're worried about Victoria too, aren't you?" asked Brandon, noticing her hesitation. Emily sighed. "Despite everything, she's still my sister." "Family is complicated," agreed Brandon. "For years, I tried to convince myself that my father was just a determined businessman. I made excuses for his actions, ignored evidence of the harm he caused." "What made you change?" Brandon was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "There was an incident 3 years ago. A family was forcibly removed from their land because my father wanted the property to expand his business. The man resisted. He was persuaded to cooperate." The way Brandon said persuaded made Emily shudder. "The man had a daughter," he continued, "about your age. She came to me, begging for help. I ignored her, told myself it was just business, that surely my father had adequately compensated the family." His voice faltered. "A week later, they found the girl on the riverbanks. She couldn't bear to see her father's suffering." "I'm sorry," murmured Emily, gently touching his arm. "That's when I realized I could no longer pretend ignorance. I started investigating, documenting. I discovered your father was doing the same. When I learned the Mitchells were in financial difficulties, I saw an opportunity for approach." "But you didn't count on Victoria and her plan to get rid of me." "No," admitted Brandon. "That complicated everything. But perhaps it was the complication we needed." Their eyes met in the dimness of the cart, a silent communication passing between them. Emily could see the guilt Brandon carried, the determination to correct his father's mistakes, and something more, a growing feeling for her that he still hesitated to express. The cart stopped abruptly, interrupting the moment. The driver, one of Brandon's trusted men, disguised as a peasant, turned to them. "Riders approaching, sir." "They're coming fast." Brandon jumped from the cart, helping Emily descend. "We need to hide. There's a forest there. Quick!" They ran into the dense woods, while the driver continued with the cart, serving as a distraction. Hidden among century-old trees, they heard the trampling of horses passing on the main road. "Vasconcel's men," whispered Brandon. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Someone must have betrayed us," replied Emily. "But who?" "The professor." "Impossible." Anthony would risk his own life for me. Brandon frowned. But there were others at the inn who might have recognized you or me. They remained hidden until dawn, when the second trusted guard found them, bringing a horse so they could continue to Marion by alternative paths. Mr. Maxwell sent men to Oak Ridge too, informed the guard. It seems he learned of your visit to the bank. Brandon cursed softly. My father and Vasconcel looking for us. The situation has worsened. What do we do now? Asked Emily, exhausted and anxious. Change. Have plans. We can't risk going to Marion. We need to return to the manor. Return, but it's dangerous. It's the only place where we'll be relatively safe until the governor's arrival in Oak Ridge. My father won't suspect if we return voluntarily, pretending our honeymoon was interrupted by homesickness. Emily wasn't convinced. And the documents? They stay with Professor Anthony. He'll find a way to deliver them to the governor. Our priority now is to protect your family. The journey back to the manor was distressing. Every noise on the road, every traveler who passed could be an informant, an enemy. Emily felt exposed, vulnerable, and worst of all, there was no news from the professor's nephew who had gone to warn her family. Upon arriving at the manor, they were received by a surprised but apparently pleased Maxwell Pierce. The honeymoon was short, he commented during dinner. Any problem in Oak Ridge? None, father, replied Brandon with studied tranquility. We just realized we preferred the tranquility of the manor. Oak Ridge was full of tourists, preparing for the Independence Day celebrations. Maxwell nodded, but his calculating eyes studied his son attentively. Interesting. And you visited the Imperial Bank, from what I heard. Emily felt her blood freeze, but maintained a neutral expression, concentrating on her plate. I went to introduce my wife to the manager, explained Brandon without hesitation. Now that she's a Pierce, Emily needs to have access to our accounts. The answer seemed to satisfy Maxwell momentarily, but the atmosphere during dinner remained tense. Later, alone in their room, Brandon carefully checked if there was any listening device before speaking. My father knows something. He never asks about my trips unless he suspects. What do we do now? We continue with our plan. We wait for news from Professor Anthony about the delivery of the documents to the governor. And meanwhile, we maintain appearances. I'm worried about my family, confessed Emily, sitting on the edge of the bed. We have no idea if the messenger reached Springwater. Brandon sat beside her, taking her hands in his. I'll send another messenger tomorrow, someone of total trust. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, they just stayed like that, connected by touch and gaze. Then, in a hesitant movement, Brandon leaned in and touched Emily's lips with his, a gentle, questioning kiss. Emily didn't pull back. She was surprised to realize how much she desired that contact, that connection with the man who, against all expectations, had become her ally, her protector, perhaps something more. When they separated, Brandon looked at her with intensity. This wasn't in the plans, he murmured. None of this was in the plans, replied Emily with a slight smile, but here we are. The next morning, unexpected news arrived at the manor. Victoria Mitchell had announced her visit for the upcoming weekend, accompanied by a committee of ladies from Springwater Society, including Secretary Vasconcel's wife. My sister coming here? Emily held the telegram announcing the visit, her hands trembling slightly. This can't be a coincidence. Brandon and Emily were in the secret basement, the only place where they could talk freely. The news of Victoria's imminent visit had arrived that morning, causing immediate agitation at the manor. Maxwell Pierce had ordered special preparations, clearly pleased with the prospect of receiving his son's sister-in-law and the powerful Secretary Vasconcel's wife. It's a trap, agreed Brandon, pacing back and forth in the confined space. Victoria and Vasconcel are coming to see for themselves what we discovered in Oak Ridge. Maybe test our reactions. Or worse, added Emily, her eyes fixed on the telegram, maybe they're coming to confirm if I'm still a docile prisoner as planned. Victoria must be shocked to learn that we returned together from Oak Ridge, apparently on good terms. Brandon stopped and looked at her intensely. I need to send another messenger to Professor Anthony. He has to deliver the documents to Governor Montgomery before Vasconcelles has a chance to intercept them. And what about my parents? We still have no news of them. The messenger I sent yesterday should reach Springwater tomorrow. We'll know soon. The days preceding Victoria's visit were tense. Emily and Brandon maintained their facade of a happy couple dining with Maxwell Pierce, walking through the gardens, appearing normal. But each moment was calculated, each word measured. Irene, the trusted maid, noticed the change in atmosphere. "The mom seems worried," she commented while helping Emily choose a dress for dinner. "I'm anxious about my sister's visit," replied Emily, careful with her words even with Irene. "It's been a while since we've seen each other." The maid hesitated before speaking again. "The servants comment that Miss Victoria is very different from you, ma'am. They say she has big ambitions." "Victoria always wanted more than life in Springwater could offer," agreed Emily, thoughtful. "But I never imagined she would go so far to get what she wanted." "Sometimes envy transforms people," murmured Irene. Then, lowering her voice even more, "Be careful, ma'am. I heard Mr. Maxwell talk with the butler about special preparations for the visit. He mentioned Secretary Vasconcelles. It seems he's coming too, although he's not on the official telegram." That night, Emily transmitted the information to Brandon. "Vasconcelles coming secretly. This changes everything." "We need to prepare our own trap," decided Brandon. "If they're coming to test us, we'll give them exactly what they expect to see." The plan was risky. Emily would pretend to be unhappy with the marriage, giving Victoria the impression that her strategy had worked. Brandon would play the role of the authoritarian but careless husband, oblivious to his wife's true feelings. Meanwhile, Mrs. Constance, who was now openly on their side, would help spread strategic rumors among the employees. The day of Victoria's arrival dawned sunny. Emily watched from the window of her room when the carriage entered through the gates of the manor. Her heart beat rapidly as she saw her sister descend, impeccably dressed and smiling as if she owned the property. "Strength," whispered Brandon, briefly holding her hand before they went down to receive the visitors. The meeting in the hall was a masterpiece of acting. Victoria embraced Emily with false effusiveness, while the other ladies of the committee observed attentively. "Dear sister, how I've missed you," exclaimed Victoria, her eyes examining Emily for signs of suffering or discontent. Victoria. "What?" "Her pleasant surprise," replied Emily, maintaining a polite but distant smile. "These are my friends from the Charitable Association," continued Victoria, introducing the ladies. The last was an elegant woman with penetrating eyes, Mrs. Elizabeth Vasconcelles, wife of the secretary. Elizabeth Vasconcelles studied Emily with clinical interest. "So this is the young woman who conquered the most coveted bachelor in Virginia. Fascinating." The comment carried a veiled threat that didn't go unnoticed. Maxwell Pierce, always the calculating host, conducted the ladies on a tour of the manor, allowing the sisters to be alone for a few moments. As soon as they were alone, Victoria's smile disappeared. "I see you haven't fled this place yet, little sister. I'm impressed by your resilience. Why would I flee, Victoria? To return to a sister who sold me like merchandise," replied Emily, keeping her voice low but firm. "Sell you? What a dramatic exaggeration. I just helped organize an advantageous marriage for the family, without consulting me after drugging me." Victoria shrugged, showing no remorse. "You were always the perfect daughter, everyone's favorite. It was the least you could do for the family. Use your precious beauty and name for something useful." "And what did you gain from it, besides the presidency of a charitable association?" asked Emily, carefully observing her sister's reactions. A calculating gleam passed through Victoria's gaze. "Let's say I have powerful new friends now. Secretary Vasconcelles, for example, has interesting plans for our farm. Plans that involve the water sources on the property, I presume." The surprise on Victoria's face confirmed Emily's suspicion. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter." "Yes, Primrose Farm sits on one of the largest aquifers in the region. The secretary has investors interested in commercial exploitation. Did our parents agree to this?" "Father still resists," admitted Victoria, "but Mother understands the need to be practical. The farm is bankrupt, Emily. This is the only way out. And you're happy to sell our family legacy to strangers, all for revenge against me? Don't be foolish. This was never about you. It was about me finally taking control of my own destiny, instead of always being your shadow. The bitterness in Victoria's voice was palpable. Besides, I have no choice now. Vasconcel is not a man to be played with. Before Emily could respond, Maxwell Pierce returned with the guests. The subject was closed, but the revelations hung in the air like an imminent threat. Lunch was served on the terrace, overlooking the lush gardens. The conversation flowed artificially, centered on social trivialities and gossip from Springwater. Brandon, seated beside Emily, maintained the facade of the indifferent husband, interacting minimally with the guests. "Your husband is not very sociable," commented Elizabeth Vasconcel to Emily, while the other ladies were distracted with dessert. "Brandon prefers his books and business to social frivolities," replied Emily, following the plan to appear resigned to the marriage. "Not all marriages are based on lively conversations, Mrs. Vasconcel." "Of course, dear. Powerful men are rarely good companions." Elizabeth smiled, a smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "My husband, for example, is a brilliant strategist, but doesn't waste time with sentimentalism." "Then it seems we have that in common," replied Emily, sustaining the woman's gaze. After lunch, while the ladies rested in their designated quarters, Brandon managed to steal a moment alone with Emily in the deserted corridor. "Vasconcel has arrived," he whispered. "He's with my father in the office now." Victoria admitted that he has plans for the water sources at Primrose Farm, and she suggested that my mother is on his side, against my father. Brandon frowned. "That explains why we haven't heard from your parents. There may be a division in the family that we didn't know about." At that moment, Irene approached hurriedly. "Ma'am, a messenger has arrived from Mr. Brandon. It's urgent." The messenger, covered in dust from the roads, brought alarming news. Professor Anthony had been detained by Vasconcel's men in Oak Ridge, and the incriminating documents had disappeared. "He managed to hide the originals," explained the messenger in a low voice. "But the secretary's men interrogated him. We don't know how much he revealed." The news fell like a bomb. If Vasconcel discovered the full extent of the plan, they would all be in grave danger. "And my parents?" asked Emily, anxious. "Is there news from Springwater?" "Your father was last seen hurriedly leaving the farm, ma'am. As for your mother, she remains on the property, but under constant surveillance by unknown men." Brandon dismissed the messenger after giving him specific instructions. Turning to Emily, his look was grave. "The situation has drastically worsened. We need to act now. What can we do? Vasconcel is here, probably planning his next move with your father, and Victoria seems completely involved with them." "Zayed, there's one thing we can use to our advantage," said Brandon, thoughtful. "My father and Vasconcel still don't know that we're aware of their plans. They believe our trip to Oak Ridge was just a romantic getaway. So we continue pretending. Ignorance. No, change of plans. We'll confront them, but on our terms." Brandon seemed to have reached a decision. "During dinner tonight, we'll reveal that we know about the water scheme. It will be an unexpected blow." "That's very risky," warned Emily. "What would prevent us from ending up like Professor Anthony or worse? The fact that this house is full of important witnesses, Vasconcel's wife, your sister, the society ladies. They wouldn't risk a public scandal." The plan was audacious, but it made sense. By partially exposing what they knew, they could gain time and possibly divide the adversaries. As they returned to their quarters without realizing, they were being observed from afar by Victoria, whose eyes shone with suspicion as she saw the discreet intimacy between the couple. Chapter 6. The Truth Revealed. Dinner that night at Pierce Manor was served with all the opulence that the traditional Virginia family could muster. Venetian crystal, Portuguese silverware, Chinese porcelain, all to impress the guests from Springwater, and of course Secretary Vasconcel, whose surprise arrival had been announced late in the afternoon. Emily, dressed in an elegant midnight blue dress, sat beside Brandon, exchanging discreet looks that communicated their silent complicity. Across the table, Victoria observed each interaction between them with growing suspicion. The mask of cordiality did not completely hide her frustration upon realizing that the relationship between her sister and Brandon seemed less unhappy than she had expected. Maxwell Pierce presided over the table, emanating patriarchal authority, while Secretary Vasconcelles, a middle-aged man with perceptive eyes and a calculated smile, dominated the conversation with carefully rehearsed political anecdotes. "So, Mr. and Mrs. Pierce," commented Vasconcelles, addressing Brandon and Emily, "I heard you made a visit to Oak Ridge recently. The historic town must be especially charming this time of year." Brandon maintained an impeccably neutral expression. "Truly enchanting, Secretary. Especially the Imperial Bank. Fascinating architecture, isn't it?" The casual comment provoked an immediate tension, perceptible only to those who knew the significance of those words. Vasconcelles' eyes narrowed slightly. "Ah, you visited the bank? Mere architectural tourism, I presume." "Actually," intervened Emily, following the agreed plan, "I was particularly interested in the history of the bank. They say many traditional Virginia families keep valuable secrets in their safes." Maxwell Pierce coughed, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Speaking of traditions, Secretary, how is the mineral water project we discussed? It seems you found a promising property in Springwater, from what I heard." "Ah, yes," replied Vasconcelles, regaining his confidence. "Primrose Farm has exceptional characteristics. We're just waiting for some formalities to begin commercial exploitation." Victoria smiled, presumptuous. "Mother is excited about the project. After all, it represents a new era for our family." "Interesting," commented Emily, delicately placing her fork on her plate. "Considering that the deed to Primrose Farm is in my father's name, and from what I know, he is absolutely against selling the water sources." A heavy silence fell over the table. The society ladies, until then absorbed in trivial conversations, suddenly paid attention, feeling the growing tension. "Your mother has been very sensible in the negotiations," replied Vasconcelles with a tense smile. "As for your father, well, older men sometimes resist inevitable progress." "Progress?" Brandon entered the conversation, his voice calm but firm. "Is that what we call the appropriation of natural resources for the benefit of a few now? Fascinating." Maxwell Pierce gave his son a warning look. "Brandon, I'm sure the Secretary has the best interests of the region in mind." "Certainly," continued Brandon, ignoring the warning, "just as he did when he authorized the expropriation of those families in Green River Valley last year, or when he granted mining licenses on protected indigenous lands." Vasconcelles paled slightly, but maintained his composure. "Young Pierce, it seems you've become very interested in administrative matters lately. Should I ask the reason for this?" "Sudden interest? Perhaps I'm just following my father-in-law's example," replied Brandon, facing the Secretary directly. "Thomas Mitchell has been compiling quite interesting information about real estate transactions in the region. A meticulous man, isn't he?" It was like lighting a fuse. Vasconcelles' face hardened, while Maxwell Pierce hit the table with enough force to make the dishes clink. "Enough! This is not the place to discuss business." But it was too late. The carefully planned confrontation had achieved its goal: to partially expose what they knew without revealing all their cards. Elizabeth Vasconcelles, observing the scene with clinical interest, intervened smoothly. "Perhaps we should change the subject. Mrs. Pierce," she addressed Emily, "I heard your marriage was quite hasty. Your sister mentioned you barely had time to say goodbye. It must have been very difficult for you." It was an obvious attempt to redirect the conversation to more vulnerable territory, exposing possible cracks in Emily and Brandon's marriage. "Actually, Mrs. Vasconcelles," replied Emily with a serene smile, "I believe the best things in life often happen unexpectedly. My marriage may have begun in an unconventional way, but I discovered in Brandon qualities I never imagined I would find." Under the table, Brandon gently squeezed Emily's hand, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Victoria, whose face briefly contorted in displeasure. The tension at dinner remained, disguised by artificial smiles and superficial conversations. When it finally ended, the guests retired to their quarters, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and veiled threats. Later, in the couple's room, Brandon carefully checked for listening devices before speaking. It worked better than expected. Vasconcel is visibly shaken. "And my sister seems furious to see us united," added Emily, sitting on the edge of the bed. "But what did we gain from this? We still don't know where my father is. Professor Anthony remains detained, and the documents are at risk. We gained time and created doubt. Vasconcel now will have to wonder how much we really know and what evidence we have in hand." Brandon sat beside her. "Besides, by mentioning your father and the documents in front of important witnesses, we created protection. They can't simply silence us without raising suspicions. What happens now? We wait, we observe, and we prepare for their next move." They didn't have to wait long. In the early hours, they were awakened by urgent knocks on the door. It was Irene, pale and breathless. "Ma'am, sir, forgive the intrusion, but Miss Victoria is trying to leave the manor in secret. She went to Mr. Maxwell's office, took some documents, and now she's preparing to depart." They dressed hurriedly and followed Irene through the dark corridors of the manor. In the stable, they found Victoria ordering a coachman to prepare a carriage. A small suitcase and a folder of documents were at her side. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Emily stepped forward, while Brandon remained in the shadows observing. Victoria turned, startled. Seeing her sister, her face assumed an expression of contempt. "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm leaving this place. Things aren't going according to plan." "What plan, Victoria? Selling me to a stranger to get rid of me? Or helping Vasconcel steal the waters of our family?" "You've always been so naive, Emily." Victoria shook her head, a bitter smile on her lips. "This was never just about you, or about the waters. It's about power, about finally having control over my own destiny without living in your shadow. And for that you allied yourself with men like Vasconcel? He's using you, Victoria. At least he sees me. For our parents, I was always just the other daughter, the one who wasn't as beautiful, as kind, as perfect as Emily." The bitterness in Victoria's words was palpable, decades of resentment finally overflowing. Brandon emerged from the shadows. "And what's in those documents you're taking, Miss Victoria? Something that belongs to my father, perhaps?" Victoria pressed the folder against her chest. "Just my life insurance, Mr. Pierce. Your father and Vasconcel are not known for their loyalty when things go wrong. You understand that you're betraying everyone, don't you? Your own family, your supposed allies." "Betrayal?" Victoria laughed, a cold and humorless sound. "I learned about betrayal by observing all of you for years. My parents, who always favored Emily, the men of Springwater, who only saw me as a path to get to my sister, and now Vasconcel and your father, who used me and would discard me at the first opportunity." Emily stepped forward, extending her hand. "Victoria, please. It's not too late. We can fix this together." For a brief moment, something wavered in Victoria's eyes, a shadow of doubt, perhaps even regret. But it passed quickly, replaced by the cold determination that had guided her actions until then. "It's been too late for a long time, little sister. Since we realized which of us was the favorite, which of us would always be the second choice. Victoria, please, get out of my way. I'm leaving, and you won't try to stop me if you know what's good for you." Victoria pulled a small revolver from her purse, pointing it alternately at Emily and Brandon. "These documents are my ticket away from here, to a new life." At that moment, heavy footsteps sounded at the entrance to the stable. Maxwell Pierce, followed by Secretary Vasconcel, appeared in the faint light of the lanterns. "It seems we have a little family meeting in the middle of the night," commented Maxwell, his tone deceptively casual. "And I see Miss Mitchell has found something that belongs to me." Vasconcel advanced, his gaze fixed on the folder in Victoria's hands. "I believe that contains confidential information, my dear. Be sensible and return it." Victoria retreated, the revolver now pointed at Vasconcel. "Not one more step. I know what you do to those who defy you." The secretary laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the stable. "And what do you intend to do, shoot a government official? That would be problematic." While the tension increased in the stable, no one noticed the external movement. Horsemen, approached silently along the main path to the manor, led by a figure that Emily would recognize anywhere, her father, Thomas Mitchell. The confrontation in the stable was reaching its climax when the main door suddenly opened. Thomas entered, followed by uniformed men and, to everyone's surprise, by Governor Montgomery in person. "I believe we arrive in time for the conclusion of this story," announced the governor, his authoritative voice silencing everyone. "Secretary Vasconcel Maxwell Pierce, you are both detained on charges of corruption, illegal appropriation of lands, and conspiracy." The expression of incredulity on Vasconcel and Maxwell's faces was almost comical. Victoria let the revolver fall, her hands trembling. "How?" began Vasconcel, but was interrupted by the governor. "Professor Anthony Sampson was quite cooperative after being rescued by my men. The documents you were so desperately seeking, copies have been in my possession for days." Thomas Mitchell stepped forward, embracing Emily with strength. "Forgive me, my daughter. I had to disappear to complete our plan. The governor needed more evidence, and I needed to protect your mother." Emily returned the embrace, tears rolling down her face. "Is Mom okay?" "She's safe now, as are all of us." As the officers led Maxwell Pierce and Vasconcel outside, Victoria remained immobile, the folder of documents still in her hands, her world crumbling around her. "And what about me?" she finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. Thomas looked at his eldest daughter, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "You will have to answer for your actions, Victoria, but not today. Today, let's just be thankful that no one was irremediably hurt." In the days that followed, the complete truth came to light. The corruption scheme led by Maxwell Pierce and Vasconcel had operated for decades, illegally appropriating lands, manipulating government contracts, and silencing opponents. The documents collected by Thomas Mitchell and supplemented by Brandon provided irrefutable evidence. For Emily and Brandon, the challenge now was to rebuild. The Pierce properties were temporarily confiscated by the state, although Brandon, having cooperated with the authorities, might eventually recover part of the family's legitimate assets. On a quiet afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the gardens of the manor, now much quieter after the departure of officers, reporters, and the curious, Brandon took Emily's hands in his. "When we married, it was out of obligation, not choice," he said, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the evening. "Now that everything is over, you have your freedom back. I'll understand if you want to annul our marriage and follow your own path." Emily observed the man before her, no longer the cold stranger she had met months ago, but someone she had learned to admire, respect, and yes, love. "They say the best marriages begin with friendship," she replied, a soft smile on her lips. "We started backwards, but perhaps we can now build something genuine, if you want." Brandon smiled, that rare smile that completely transformed his face. "Nothing would make me happier." As the sun disappeared on the horizon, bringing the end of a dark chapter and the beginning of luminous possibilities, Emily reflected on the extraordinary journey she had traveled. From victim to heroine, from prisoner to partner by choice. And somewhere far away, Victoria Mitchell also began her own journey of redemption, finally learning that true power didn't come from conspiracy or envy, but from accepting herself, with all her imperfections. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Emily and Brandon has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it here, clicking to the left. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content. We'll be anxious to read your comments and know what you thought of this intense American romance.